Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host, and this is the Narcissist Bag of Tricks. Somebody wants to visit. Look who's here. Hero? Hero? He appears to be a little camera shy. Aren't you? Are you? Emotional terrorism. I'm going to start off on an individual level and then expand to a more global level where the very same technique is being used. When dealing with a narcissist or other cluster B creature, on the individual level, they will use what I've just called emotional terrorism. As an example, you have a best friend or a partner or a close friend, and you've established certain, let's say, rules, like, I'm your friend and I'll never betray you, I will always have your back, things like that. And you do associate with the person on a regular basis, and you may share the same view that you're the same way, yet when we're dealing with a cluster B creature, it's fake. They're pretending, but we don't always know that at first. So what you'll find is eventually a time comes when they cross over some line or step over some boundary, and you see they've done something that completely betrays you. Like they turn you in for something you didn't do just to get you in trouble, or something horrifying that you would never want to have done and you would think was understood when you had your discussion about your loyalty towards one another. Many times if they're caught, one of their tricks in their bag is to use something like a tragic event or some kind of really sensitive subject, something people hold sacred, something that people really are emotionally reactive to. Example would be your friend did what they did, you find out they did what they did, and of course they'll tell you they didn't, but then you find the overwhelming proof they did. This is when they will pull in the elements of the pity play as well, and they'll pick a tragic event. They may paint themselves as a victim. There are many ways they can do this. One way would be, say you figure out what they did and it really hurts you and it's a horrible thing, and they know they're caught. They may pull the trick out of their bag, which is to claim something horrifying happened. Like, when I was a child, I was raped. That's what caused me to do this horrible thing to you, which is complete BS. What does this mean? First off, someone being raped or attacked or beaten up or anything, if there's someone you care about, is going to generate an emotional response. So if you really care about someone, for example, and this horrible thing didn't happen, it was just a discussion you were having one day, if that happens, you're going to feel empathy towards them and think, oh, that's awful, how could you survive that, oh, whatever, and you'll really react emotionally. You may feel like you should be a little nicer to them or something. Well, that's what they're trying to get from you in this case. They've clearly done something horrifying that they would never want done to themselves. And confronted about it, they're saying, oh, well, it's because this happened. No, it's because you deliberately did this. You're an adult and you made the decision to pretend to be my best friend while you were robbing me blind behind my back or whatever they do. What does this tell you? It tells you, first of all, they don't have any regard for you. You're an object, evidently, to be used. A motivation to have control over you and to show their power, and it's also very cruel. It demonstrates they do not have empathy, which is one of the core characteristics of the cluster B. I mean, who would do such a thing? Lead you to believe a horrifying thing happened just to gain sympathy from you, and in this case, be forgiven for the horror that they've committed against you, their best friend. It also shows that they're willing to hurt you because they're actually inflicting pain on you when they do whatever they do horrifying, and then also they're attempting to do it again with their fake story of, I only did it because, which they could also have blamed you for it too. It could have been, I just did this because you didn't look like you were interested in me, or because I didn't believe you liked me, or something. They'll make up an excuse, which again is BS as well. If you're not familiar with such breeds of people or creatures, you may fall for this. If, for example, they didn't do the horrible thing and they just told you a sob story, sometimes they do it ahead of time. That way, if something does come up later, they can refer back to it and say, remember, I told you that that horrible thing happened? Well, because that horrible thing happened, that's why I betrayed you and tried to murder you, or whatever they did. That's the individual portion. Next, I'll be covering the same technique from a global perspective. Emotional terrorism on a global level. What does that mean? Before going into that, in case you didn't know, I think it was either 2012 or 2013, Obama, or Obama, silently repealed the Smith-Mundt Act, which previously, from the 1948, had forbidden the U.S. government to use propaganda against the United States, which is a really big deal, because around that time was when a particular event just happened. Before going into that, we need to discuss something called psychological warfare. Propaganda is legal against us in the USA. That includes something called a PSYOP. Sandy Hoaxtar did a show recently discussing that psyop. It's a term that's used to denote any action which is practiced mainly by psychological methods with the aim of evoking a planned psychological reaction in other people. Various techniques are used and are aimed at influencing a target audience's value system, like your opinions on guns, their belief system, their emotions, their motives, reasoning, or behavior. It's used to induce confessions or reinforce attitudes and behaviors that are favorable to the originator's objectives and are sometimes combined with black operations or false flag tactics. It's also used to destroy the morale of enemies through tactics that aim to depress troops' psychological states. Target audiences can be governments, organizations, groups, or individuals. And it's not just limited to soldiers, civilians, or foreign territories. It can also be targeted by technology and media so as to cause an effect in the government of their country. Keeping that in mind, the perfect example of one of these things, of course you were never told this because Vomit made it legal to give propaganda to us, which is what? Designed to sway our opinion. So do you think they're really going to go on the news and say, this terrible thing happened, blah, 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 and then later say, oh, propaganda's legal, so like that last story we gave you, that was propaganda. It wasn't you think they're going to say that? No, but they're not in trouble for doing it. It's legal. In fact, television, news, or anything is considered entertainment. Keep that in mind, those of you who believe what your counterfeit news network tells you. We're going to use the example of a place called Sandy Hoax. It's a school in another city, in another state. And if you still believe that story's real, pretend you're in a different world. What I'm discussing here is what does go on and can go on legally in regards to the emotional terrorism. The purpose of this video, though, is not to determine whether this did or didn't happen or whether real or fake. Chances are, if you've done any kind of investigation into this event, you'll know that if it isn't fake, at least we know that the story we were told is not anything close to whatever did really happen. That's fair. The story they told us is full of holes, like Swiss cheese. The plot lines, the inconsistencies. The story is that on one particular day, a teenage kid with autism strolled on into a school and used his gun to murder so many students and teachers. Now, we won't go into the different accounts from the witnesses, some, in fact, coming from one of the people who was already dead, but she still gave testimony. They had a brand new security system, which you would assume would include a camera. But oh no, the new security system doesn't record things. It's just so we can see people. Supposedly these kids were gunned down, and then the person who did it shot itself and died. Well, what do we have here? What did we just discuss? Psychological operation. In real life, if such an event really happened, that would be a tragic situation, which brings us back to our narcopath, narcissist, fools, creatures. This is a tragic event. But in this case, it's being distributed to the world or the national news that this terrible thing happened. Think of what that does. If you're a parent and you have children that go to a school, such a story will inspire you to fear that maybe your child could be in danger if this same thing were to happen in this child's school, which is very powerful. Because what are we trying to do here? We're trying to manipulate, basically. That's not what they said. That was Wikipedia, by the way. They're trying to influence the public's view, and obviously there is some group of creeps in this world who wants to disarm all Americans, and they are using these types of events. They first became legal, and of course you know it's a learning experience. I know the people involved in that went online and read all the different comments about this and about that. So the next PSYOP shooting they planned that you see on the national media would cover some of those spots, which it's kind of funny when you realize what's going on to watch that and see it and think on the last one they did this, oh, is this their version of showing something even though nothing's there? Because remember, dealing with the cluster B creatures, the only gift it's given me is when you see their tactics in action in other places, it makes it easier to identify. Especially in stories like these, where if you were to take all the news coverage from this event and just listen to it front to back and make notes of everything, you would find contradictions everywhere. Things that couldn't be possible, but they are claimed to be, which I realize witnesses are not very reliable anyway, is what studies have shown. But still, some of these things are completely retarded. You're being told that all these kids were murdered, and of course they were left in the school overnight. Nobody was allowed to come in to check to see if they were really dead. They were just dead because it was obvious. That's a different story. The point is, it's a ridiculous story, and anybody who uses any critical thinking skills watching the information presented about it would come to the same conclusion. You have parents who are on there talking from like a day after, filmed, laughing and talking about how their child was this and that, and a regular person here is thinking, if my daughter was just murdered the day before, I doubt I'd be dressed up fancy in front of a TV camera, laughing about this and laughing about that. And then people say everyone grieves differently, but then you see another family doing the same thing. It's like, well, in that city, they don't do it differently. And if you see anybody crying, no tears come out. It's, oh, this terrible thing happened, and you watch their face and it's completely dry, which tells you they're acting fake. Then you've got the goofy coroner telling his story, which is ridiculous. The choice of words he uses in front of the people at the press conference, and how he contradicts that there was no long gun in the school, but supposedly every kid was shot by the long gun. But he doesn't know how many boys or girls. What were they wearing? Cute kid stuff. I hope this doesn't come crashing down on their head. And then there's the father you see coming into the press conference, not knowing evidently that the camera is focused on him as he walks in casually laughing. And then he knows he's about to go in front of the microphone, so you see him like doing a exercise that actors do to change their demeanor. So he's doing this right on film, if you're seeing it, and then he's like, hi, I'm so-and-so, I lost a child and whatever. And anyway, all that's obviously fake. So even if something did horrible happen, the people representing it are fake. At least we've got that. But what does this do? People may ask, well, why on earth would someone do that? Well, we know why. We want to sway the opinion. So somebody in charge of the people in charge is trying this because the people have the right to bear arms. They don't want the people to bear arms. This is like the first of a series of events. If you look at all of them, they rarely make sense. There's usually no motive. Many times the killer's dead, so you can't question it. Sometimes it's not, but then it's an MK Ultra zombie. You can't question that. Why would anyone want to do that? Well, they want to start spreading a long-term message that guns are bad. We shouldn't have them. Look what happens. And then using the children, which is cruel, psychopathic, and evil, because any normal, sensible person in real life, they're told that a bunch of kids are killed. Well, that's horrifying. That doesn't mean to lose your mind and give away all your rights, but that's what their goal is, to distract you from the fact that they want you to give those rights up. They can't just come to you and say give your rights up, so what do? They plan these psychological operations, which are effective sometimes in persuading the people to believe, oh, I'm in a dangerous place, oh dear, I'm living in fear, oh, and when you're living in fear, that means you're easier to be controlled. Of course, you know they'll never admit to these things because, first off, the GoFundMe account, some of course which were created days or weeks before the actual event, which is common for these false flag shooting things. It's like they do the same things every time, which is sick. Just like the narcissist monster. If you were to get some of their exes together and talk, you'd be hearing them doing the same things to each of you. But of course, the point of this is for you to watch, you to become emotional, you to live in fear that your child may be next. These parents, of course, that were proven to be actors, most of them, nasty actors at that, they rushed like the next day onto Obama's Air Force One and then tour the world holding up pictures of the non-existent children. It goes on and on and on. This whole operation is very close and similar to the emotional terrorism I'm referring to in the individual level, because in this case it's to convince the masses. And what typically happens is the masses turn their television on, they see the story, it's repeated over and over and over, and like I used to be before I realized what was going on and who owns all the networks, I would think, well, TV, the news said it, that's the truth, end of story. There's nothing to look into. Fortunately, modern day age where you can record things on DVRs and watch them again, you can actually study them and see what's going on. Just like with the individual level, this technique is designed to get you to believe a certain way. Just like your cluster B creature wants you to believe that it is telling you the truth. The news goes on and tells you these stories. They repeat them, and Mockingbird repeat them over and over. And even if it's not the worst shooting in the world, they say it is. And then the next one is too, by some kid with no motive at all. Go figure. But it's demonstrating, just like with the other, no empathy, no regard for you. You are basically a sheep that they want to manipulate to get you to change your opinion on something for their benefit. It's very selfish, a form of control, a form of power. It's cruel. If the situation was real, that is tragic and horrifying. But when you fake it, it's just like when the narcissist tells you it was raped. And that's why, after promising you fidelity for 10 years, it had 6 other lovers behind your back all that time, and expect you to believe it.
I am the most beautiful narcopath you'll ever meet.
As the narcopath, I do what I have to do to get what I want. If that means pretending to be a Christian or whatever other religion, Muslim or whatever else, I'll do it. Doesn't mean I know anything about the religion, and if anybody asks, I'll just make an excuse up like I did for you. And because my teats are so hot, they usually buy it. Ha! But if they sit and spend any time thinking about it, they're probably going to be coming back to me asking for more information. Well, honey, I ain't got it. That's the time that I leave.
And you know, I really don't want to hear about how heartbroken you were when you decided to become a detective and found out for certain that I was having sex with one of your good friends.
Well, honey, that's your own fault. I told you. Do not check up on me. Do not spy on me. Do not go looking for anything on me. And what did you do? You started snooping. The fact that your heart's broken, that ain't my problem. Because you didn't follow my rules. If you would have never looked into all that stuff like the nosy mouse you are, well then you wouldn't know any of this and we'd probably be married by now. You had to go and be Mr. Salute and check up on me and look into things. Well, you have nobody to blame but yourself for your broken heart. Take your goddamn broken heart and eat it.